Welcome to Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is the Andrew Lawton Show, brought to you by True North.
But we go back to what Justin Trudeau has articulated as the essence of Canada's foreign policy, which is that it's not a foreign policy rooted in Canada first. It is a feminist foreign policy. And when else do you need a feminist foreign policy but when sexual violence is taking place in a foreign conflict? And this is oddly where our foreign affairs minister was nowhere to be found for 2 months. Brian Lilley had a great piece about this in the Toronto Sun. Joly proves Trudeau's feminist foreign policy just empty words. He joins me now. Brian, good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
I mean, I don't know if you were in this boat. I sort of mocked this idea of a feminist foreign policy when it was first announced because it just didn't seem to be coming from anywhere and rooted in any practical manifestations of what this would be. But the government was committed to it. They said we're going to apply a gender lens to everything, and they do this in their dealings in government. And here we have one case where you'd think the feminist perspective is pretty ironclad and pretty clear-cut, and oddly, our foreign policy was not interested in that.
No, they weren't. But look, this goes back to every issue that Trudeau's dealt with on this front. You recall that when he was first elected, he said he'd have a gender balanced cabinet. And I'm going off memory here, so if I'm off by one or two, please forgive me. But 2015, he announces the gender balanced cabinet. And why? Because it's 2015. And then we get the order of precedence, which details which cabinet ministers are considered most senior, which ones would take over in the event something happens to the prime minister. And it's all old white men at the top. And then we find out that 5 of the 15 cabinet ministers in that first cabinet are all junior cabinet ministers. They're not even full ministers. So they make less money, they have less seniority, they have fewer, a lesser department, and they were all women. So, that was pointed out and they said, oh, well, that's just a mistake. And then they fixed it. Time and again, you can look at their feminist credentials and Trudeau fails on every front, groping a reporter, elbowing, a female MP in the breast just because things were being delayed and he was frustrated. Time and again, Jody Wilson-Raybould, Jane Philpott, Cesar Savannah's, Selena
Caesar-Chavez, CCC.
Yes. Just look at the way that women who have dealt with him describe how he talks to them. So it's no surprise that when it comes to a feminist foreign policy, it's just about words as well, empty words. This government is about the announcement. It's not about governing. It's not about the policy. It's just about putting out a press release.
Yeah, and I mean, this is not to broaden the discussion unnecessarily here, but we've seen a tectonic shift in the last 5 years, the last 6 years in how we view sexual violence and how we view sexual assault. And whatever people think of the Me Too movement, the refrain that came out of this era was believe all women. And now the number of people I see on social media, people that are very supportive of the government being slow to respond on this, saying, well, I don't know, did the rapes actually happen? And I don't know if we believe, but they don't even care about this glaring gap in the rules they've established over the last 6 years and the rules as they pertain to Hamas terrorists.
Melanie Joly was Heritage Minister when the Me Too movement started, and she went on CBC on Q and did an interview all about that topic. She was Foreign Minister last year when the U.S. Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade, and as part of her feminist foreign policy, stood there with Justin Trudeau denouncing the American Supreme Court overturning abortion law, federal abortion precedent, and returning that issue to state legislatures. She always had things to say on that. But on this issue, where there was proof of Israeli women, Jewish women being raped as a weapon of war, she was silent. She just couldn't be bothered talking about it. But then compare, as I did in the column in the Sun, October 17th, and there is the claim by Hamas, a terrorist organization, puts out a claim that Israel has bombed the Al-Shifa hospital. Melanie Joly doesn't wait for proof. She tweets that doing this is a war crime. That tweet is still up. She believed Hamas with no proof. The international observers, the Israeli government, the Israeli Defense Forces, images put up by Hamas themselves to brag about what they did, all point to the proof that women were raped on October 7th, that this was a tactic they used. The instruction manuals found on dead Hamas fighters detailed that, yes, this is what part of what you should do. And she couldn't bother denouncing it. Now, I'll give the Trudeau government some credit. From early on, they said the right thing about the October 7th attacks. Justin Trudeau denounced it, said that Israel has a right to defend itself. He was steadfast in that. But as you alluded to, as the conflict's gone on, they've started to waver all over the place. But for the foreign affairs minister of a feminist government implementing a feminist foreign policy, not to come up with this, it is mind-boggling. I was writing on another issue today, and I'm finding references to their feminist agenda on climate change. I don't think a lot of mothers who do shopping for their kids to feed them will be happy with what that leads to, with a higher price for hamburger meat. Mm-hmm. But this language is peppered all through the government's talking points and its agenda. It's just not present in the actual reality of how they operate.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who's ever looked at ATIPs, government documents, you'll see oftentimes these reports on the gender-based GBA plus, gender-based analysis plus, and it's that you have to take anything and everything and somehow find a gender argument. You want to talk about office chairs? Well, let's do a gender-based analysis to make sure that gender needs are being met, and all of this stuff. And you're right that it's a government that on paper claims it's doing this in every single facet of its existence, and they're certainly bringing in diversity trainers to that end, but when the rubber hits the road, it's nowhere to be found.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons this government is so frustrating is that the policy is the communications tool. The policy isn't governing. The policy isn't saying, you know what, we're going to go to the UN and we're going to raise issue with the fact that Iran is chairing I forget what the exact title is, but there's a gender council within the human rights realm at the United Nations, and Iran's chairing that? How is that feasible, and why are we not complaining loudly? I don't doubt that Bob Rae is. I disagree with Bob Rae on an awful lot of policy, but he is a fundamentally decent man, especially on issues like this. But he speaks for the government, but he doesn't set the policy. But we should be banging our shoes on the table like the old Soviets at the UN, demanding that something be done when you get Iran, who is oppressing women, beating them for not wearing their hijabs in public, and they're in charge of a committee on gender rights?
You can't make it up. That's the terrible part of this.
Okay, can I tell you something quick about these crazy bits? Because back during the Harper government, there was something similar. North Korea, as they're trying to build their bomb, is named the head of the Nuclear Disarmament Committee or something to that effect. And I looked at John Wright, who was then the Foreign Affairs Minister, and I said, how does this happen? He said, believe it or not, they go on an alphabetical order, and they were next. And often how these things happen.
So then, like, Oman was next, and then Pakistan would have also been, coming up there. That's an alphabetical order. Okay, so when you're launching your new dictatorship, you want to call it like Ardvarkistan or something, and then you'll be like first on the order of precedence for all of these things.
For Peace and Democracy Council.
Yeah, exactly. Let me just, I want to talk about one of your climate pieces, but before, let me just ask you about the equivocation and the wavering of this government. Do you think it is a government that is letting its inner desires come out, like they were only able to hold up the veneer for so long, or do you think they're responsive to a change in the climate that they're seeing, and it's a bit more cynical in that sense?
I think that there are real divides within the Liberal Party, and I think there's real divides on the issue of how to, what stand to take on the war that Hamas launched against Israel within Canadian society at large. I've taken what I believe to be the only correct moral stand, and that is that Israel has a right to defend itself, and the true oppressors of the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip, well, that's Hamas, and Hamas must be eradicated. I'm glad to see Bernie Sanders in the United States saying that. Well, we've got progressive politicians up here calling for ceasefire. Bernie Sanders is on TV explaining why that can't happen. We need more of that. But so I think I think Trudeau was trying to please all people, and in the end, he's pleased none. The Jewish community is livid with Justin Trudeau. And for the most part, the Jewish community have been reliable liberal voters. Some did move over to the Conservatives during the Harper years, but for the most part, most have still been reliably liberal. And but the Muslim community, which has been courted by Trudeau, well, you saw the story the other day, 400 Muslim professionals who have been donors to the Laurier Club signed a letter saying they're leaving. And then on the weekend, there was a pro-Palestinian demonstration in Ottawa that marched to Langevin Block, where Trudeau's office is, and were denouncing him as a terrorist, claiming that he had blood on his hands for refusing to call for a ceasefire now. And so he's lost both sides. By trying to make everybody happy, he's made nobody happy. And I think it's going to have lead to a real shift in Canadian politics. Exactly how, I think we're still seeing that, shake out.
Yeah, very well said. Just before I let you go, Brian, I have to ask about this piece you had this morning in the Toronto Sun. Trudeau targets cow burps and your ability to afford beef. What is going on?
Okay, let me just switch my browser window here to, this is the Government of Canada announces new economic incentive to reduce methane emissions from beef cattle. It is the protocol called Reducing Enteric Methane Emissions from Beef Cattle. Cows burp a lot, and they want that to change. They don't want as many cow burps. They want better handling of manure on farms. Look, these are all good things, and farmers are some of the most actually environmentally conscious people you will ever meet, because it's their livelihood. But what the Trudeau government wants to do is try and get farmers to use more expensive feeds. Right now, most cattle in this country, they are raised from calf to stock. They're raised on a diet of grass or hay, and they might be finished with corn at the end, but they're going to be raised mostly on that. They're going to be out in the pasture in the winter. They're going to eat from those big round bales of hay that we see going by on trucks all the time. Going to a corn-based diet, corn silage, or adding red seaweed apparently can help reduce the methane, or adding chemicals. This has potential to change the composition of the beef, but also it's going to be more expensive. It's going to be more expensive. Now they say, well, we're going to be able to allow farmers to sell offsets, and that'll make them more money. Well, just like the carbon tax, though, it's going to drive up prices. And so you and I are going to have to pay more. We're all going to be like Cousin Eddie from National Lampoon saying, I don't know why they call it hamburger helper. Tastes just fine on its own, because we won't be able to afford the hamburger. Now, here's the other funny part is, for years, you've had consumers who can afford it moving towards grass-fed beef. And you see grass-fed milk. Why? It's supposed to be healthier, less saturated fats, more omega-3 fatty acids, more nutrients. Well, guess what? You're going to have less of that if you follow the government's plan, because the beef will be better for the planet, but not as good for you. So it's a bizarre situation, but climate change policy comes before everything, including you having a healthy diet, Andrew.
Yeah, so coming soon is going to be like the bovine flatulence tax, where, cows just basically have to pay a levy anytime they, let a bit of gas out. $1 out the front, $2 out the back. I think that's how it's going to be calculated.
Jacinda Ardern's government, New Zealand, brought in one of those. Now, they've just lost power, and they've brought in a conservative government who's put that on pause for now. They'll probably scrap it. But yeah, they brought in a cow burp tax and a sheep burp tax. So, don't give them ideas. These things are out there, and we don't want to encourage them.
All right, fair enough. Brian Lilley from the Toronto Sun, always a pleasure. We should do this again sooner rather than later. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.